This first email is from a delightful person in real love who has grown remarkably in her journey over the last couple of years. She said, I was Skyping a friend in real love this evening, and I managed to see myself clearly when I started to withdraw. That alone is remarkable. I mean, we can all see we're withdrawn when we're deep in the bowels of a cave. We can all see that we're angry when we're breaking bottles against the wall and setting fire to the house. The trick is recognizing when we're doing these unproductive behaviors early on, because then we can change them. You light a match and you're in the middle of a field of grass. When you recognize that you've lit a match, pretty easy to blow out. If you don't recognize a grass fire until you've got a square mile burning, you just pretty much gonna have to wait till it quits burning. It's early recognition. So this is huge. You saw yourself when you started to withdraw. Seeing what we do is the beginning to everything. And most people are not willing to take that initial step or unable. They've been doing the same behaviors for so long that when they first begin to do something that's unproductive, it's just not noticeable. It's not unusual. So why would they do anything about it? You continue. She was telling me that she doesn't think that we need a real love guide, meaning, like a wise person. And we really can do it all through God. And I didn't agree. So I decided to voice my opinion that I think most people do need a human guide, because making the leap to trusting an invisible, at least with our physical eyes, an invisible being of all power and all knowledge can be a pretty tough thing, as nearly all of us have proven. Faith is a elementary, as in early on at the base of the pyramid principle, but remains difficult throughout all of our lives. Trusting an all-knowing being can be difficult. It can be easier to trust somebody who's present in the flesh and available, which can then lead us to trust in an unseen being. I felt myself shut down, you continue, and I felt my expression plateau so that I looked relatively distant. I had achieved a false sense of safety. It was a mixture of sensing that if I put my opinion forward again as final and not finish by saying something neutral, then it might irritate her. In other words, I was afraid to just state my opinion without watering it down. So I defaulted to just shutting down. I began to withdraw. And I didn't want to appear as trying to be right. Very understandable. We've all seen what happens in a conversation when we state our opinion intransigently, where we're stubborn about stating our opinion, especially if it contradicts the opinion of the person that we're talking to, and how quickly that fire can go flame out of control. So understandable that you would withdraw because you just don't want to do that. And undoubtedly, at some time early in your life, you did experience that. You expressed your opinion and somebody just squashed you like a bug. I happen to know your father, and his habit, which you have seen all of your life, is to consistently state his opinions as absolute fact. I don't think I've ever heard your father say, it might be possible, or I think that. No, he just says, this is how the world is, because that's how he sees it. And it's not subject to questions of any kind. And you would be afraid of looking like that. You're also afraid of having conversations with people who are like that. You continue. So there are moments in interactions where I decide that my true opinion or feelings would not be welcomed. So instead of saying them, I just roll over and shut down. Of course, you learned that habit with your father. There was really no other choice. There was no standing up to your father. I've only seen one person do that successfully, ever. your father. So the fact that you would have developed a habit of rolling over, yeah, I get it. You continue, I'm glad that I saw this happen in the moment today. No kidding. And I'm going to practice choosing to speak more directly rather than compromise expressing myself next time and find myself in the same situation. Can you see anything in this interaction that I haven't seen that might help me? Well, to start off with, you've seen a lot. It turns out you can express your categorical opinion, clear, strong, without vacillation, but without controlling the other person. The thing is, you don't know how to do that because you've never seen it. When your father states his clear, strong, categorical opinion, for example, if somebody says to me, what is 2 plus 2? I'm not hesitant. I don't vacillate. I don't go, well, one of the possibilities is 4, but, there might be other opinions. No, 2 plus 2 is 4. But what you saw your father do was control the other person. He kept going. He kept stating his opinion. I've watched him state his opinion 5, 6, 8 times until the other person finally agreed with him. So you believe, because the two were associated, that cleanly stating and directly stating your opinion is controlling people because you've only ever seen it done that way. Turns out there's another way to do it. The problem with your father who trained you is not that he has strong opinions. It's fine to have strong opinions, like about 2 plus 2. I have a pretty strong opinion about that it's 4. It's that he attempts to control people to agree with him, or at the very least, shut them up. It's that, and you learned that. One possible solution, you clearly state your opinion to the person that you're talking to without doubt or making yourself small, and then add this, something like this. I'm not saying memorize these words ever. Something like, quote, that's where I am in my own personal investigation of that subject. And I freely admit, I feel fairly strongly about it because I've investigated it quite a bit. I've gathered considerable evidence. I've sought the opinion of trusted advisors, and I feel it to be true. I am not, however, interested in any way in convincing you of anything. That little part of that one little sentence is huge. It really relaxes people. I've seen it over and over because people will ask me my opinion in seminars right now, on video chats, in interventions, in just casual conversations. And I will say, this is what I've learned. This works and that doesn't. But I'm not trying to convince you. Oh, you see people just... So continuing the quote, I don't need you to agree with me. So if you have a genuine question about what I've said, I'd love to answer it. If you simply want to restate your opinion, though, or just contradict what I've said, there's really no need. I've watched people, especially husbands and wives, do this back and forth over and over and over again. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. And you're going, is somebody getting something out of this? So you say, I know my stand on this subject, and I know yours. You may even state their opinion. So we clearly have different opinions. And we don't have to agree in order to, and then you fill in the blank here, be friends, have a loving conversation, enjoy the day, whatever. So there's nothing wrong with having strong opinions. We screw up when we try to control other people with them. New subject. This is from a man who had gotten to the point where he was pretty much completely crippled by his pain. He was on multiple medications. He was living on government support. His life was, pretty over. He hadn't learned anything or done anything new in years. We spent a lot of time together. He listened. He trusted, which is unusual for somebody who's been stuck that long. Sometimes he didn't trust. Sometimes he didn't listen. But overall, he persisted. He didn't quit. That might be one of two qualities that you can use to predict whether somebody's going to change their life. They're willing to learn, and they don't quit. They keep going. After decades of pain and helplessness, though, he was very slow to acknowledge anything positive, like because he'd been raised in a negative environment his entire life. He was slow to acknowledge things like learning, that he was learning, that he was growing, that he was feeling loved, that he was being loving, that he had changed a perspective. He was slow to acknowledge things like hope. Understandable, since in the past, any kind of hope was quickly extinguished by criticism, fear, pain, well, life in his case. He wrote the following: I am noticing some very positive changes. Wow, you'd really have to know this guy to know what a miracle that is for him to say that. Because prior to this, he pretty much was capable only of writing negative sentences. I think his pen would have exploded, or his computer keyboard would have exploded if he'd said something positive. I mean, bless you. I mean it. You're a walking miracle that you've persisted this far and changed this much. You've been told lies about yourself for so long, lies describing you as being less than you are, that you tend to accept the truth about your growth slowly, in fact, very slowly. When I describe how you're learning and growing, I am not complimenting you. I'm trying simply to help you see the truth about how well you're doing. Why? Why would I do that? Well, first, to better equip you to dispel the lies that until recently have filled your entire soul, your entire being. Second, I point out when you're doing well, to give you confidence in the steps and the risks that you're taking. How else would you develop confidence? If you've never done these things before, how would you even know you're headed in the right direction? Third, to simply give you a more certain idea of your coordinates on the map of life. We talked about this in the last video chat, in fact, that a map is useless unless you know where you are on the map. And you're learning better and better where you are. And since you're moving on the map, in this case, forward, occasionally you need somebody to say, okay, pay attention. See the little X down here at the bottom? This is where you started. And this little X here in purple, if you like, this is where you are now. Notice there's a difference between the two. They're apart. And where you are now is further ahead. So you're doing unbelievably cool things. And you'll be better prepared to take the next step if your position on the map is more accurate. It's the most important thing in using a GPS, for example, to have it correctly entered into the GPS where you're starting. You continue. I'm feeling a bit more confident, and times when my mind brightens up a bit more and I can think more clearly. That is exactly what happens when you're trusting and learning and taking action. Confidence, you think, you feel brighter, you think clearer. Everything combines to help you. So you're succeeding. As I said, congratulations. You say, I feel happier and I almost don't know what to do with myself. Again, you'd have to know this guy. This is the equivalent of an earthworm becoming a circus clown. This is just ebullient. This is overjoyed that he would say, I almost don't know what to do with myself because I'm happier. This is beautiful. It's like sunrise and the blooming of a flower at the same time. You were unhappy for so long, for so many years, that the idea of your becoming happy simply did not compute. You couldn't imagine that happening. It didn't fit into your view of the universe. Although you hated your misery, you told me that right in the beginning, there was a certain kind of comfort in the familiarity of it. You knew how to be miserable, so you kind of liked it. Does that sound a little bit insane? Yeah, because you kind of were a little bit insane. So you knew unhappiness, but this business of being happy, it's just crazy different. And to continue the map metaphor that we started, you're in a new place where you've never been. So where do you go from here? How are you supposed to even behave in this new place? What are the rules? It's no wonder you, in your words, don't know what to do with yourself. You continue, I'm beginning to feel positive. I hope you read those words again. You haven't exactly overused them in the past. Goodness, until recently, I'm not sure your brain could have put those two words together, very positive, with anything regarding yourself. It's remarkable. You continue, I keep getting more and more confident and happier and do things I want to do. It's all good right now. Keep remembering this, as in read this email over and over again. It really is all good right now. No kidding. I hope you keep a special file someplace. Print these out or keep them in a file on your computer of the more remarkable moments of learning in your journey. Milestones, if you like, either electronically or printing them out, doesn't matter. Then on the days or in the moments when you have doubts or you just have a down day, we all have those, you can pull out writings like this and remember that you really can do this. How? How do you know that? Because you're doing it right now. And if you can do it now, and you've done it several times before, you can do it again. You continue. I also want to be honest in these emails. Well, of course, if you only tell me about the good days, then you wouldn't really be truly sharing yourself. And it would significantly affect your feelings of acceptance in a negative way. It would become a kind of game where you manipulated how I saw you, which is similar to your old routine of earning acceptance. You continue, but it's a lot different from before. I'm sure that all my fears and insecurities will go. Oh, I hope you're hearing yourself talk here again and read these sentences again. You don't have to eliminate all your fears and insecurities right now. No, you just keep taking one step after the other, one after the next. And if you don't quit, you will grow. With the truth and with love, your fears and insecurities simply will die of malnourishment. They'll starve to death, quietly replaced by the vibrant energy of the truth and love. You can feel it in this email that you're writing to me. You conclude, you know my reality, so I don't really need to tell you what I'm struggling with. Would you like me to be honest about the perspectives I have about my difficulties? Well, of course, always. And keep in mind that when you do that, if I propose an alternative to something that is negative or unhappy, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't have difficulties or negative feelings about whatever you're describing. I'm simply giving you additional choices based more thoroughly on the truth to expand your options. What you wrote today is beautiful, certainly worth keeping and certainly worth reading 10 or more times. New subject. This is from a guy who recognized that it was time to elevate his game from an intellectual understanding of real love to feeling it and living it. He said, "Last night I was confronted by criticism and negativity. I remembered the truth and hung on to the feeling of peace that you've been helping me to find. But I couldn't keep it up. I didn't sustain it. I cracked and I got angry. So now it's time to learn to love marathon style, long and sustained." Yes, it is time, but your cracking is also understandable. This is all new. Now think of anger as this might help you to sustain your remembering the truth. That when you get angry, it's like hitting somebody in the face with a rock. The more starkly we see our negative behaviors, the less likely we are to repeat them. Sure, it might briefly protect you to hit somebody in the face with a rock, but it's not a great long-term plan. And as you said, you're in this for marathon-style happiness. Anger causes more of the criticism and negativity and the "I don't love you" that you don't want. Anger is that dangerous, and this might be just one little tool that will help you not be angry more consistently. New subject. I know a woman, we'll call her Julie, who was raised by one of the world's queens of victimhood. Blaming, negativity, controlling, being right. You know, all the usual stuff that kind of goes together. Julie moved away from home and then from one job to another, each one being less like her home life than the one before, which is a beautiful thing to see. In other words, she was progressing, she was learning, she was moving away from the patterns she learned as a child. She wrote me and she said, "I finally got a dream job. Great benefits, better pay, small teams. It went great for months, but the more loving and peaceful and happy she became, the greater it highlighted the old standards of okay as actually awful. The contrast is greater. The more happiness we learn, the more we're able to see how miserable we were before." Her definition of okay in the past had become just better than the hell of living at home. Julie said that at her work, which once she thought was wonderful, everybody at work never stopped whining, gossiping, complaining, and talking about nothing at all. She had no interest in participating in any of it, so she just stayed quiet and did her job. At her yearly review, her boss said that she had changed. And they said they missed the old Julie, the one who had been so fun. It even affected her yearly raise. She wanted to know what she should do. My suggestion was, just be yourself. Don't go way out of your way to conform to the whining and the complaining and the gossiping just so that you will be more liked, so that you will be the old Julie that they get along with easier. When people are miserable together and there's one person who's not, it makes them uncomfortable. And that's what your boss is telling you. You're making the group just a little bit uncomfortable because you're not as snotty as you used to be. You're paid to do a job, which means getting the tasks of the job done and also being part of a team. Now, this is where it gets tricky. You can do that without becoming bitter like everybody else. For example, people will say to me, as you all probably hear every day or every other day, oh, that President Trump can be so whatever. And we hear that a lot because he makes himself a pretty easy target. You can join in that negative talk and turn it into a bitter conversation and be more part of the group. Or what I say is something like, I couldn't possibly recall what I've said exactly on any particular occasion. I've said things like, he can really have a loud mouth. But so far, I haven't seen him make any big mistakes or make any great accomplishments that were more significant than those of the presidents who preceded him. It's an impossible job. This man just does it considerably louder than most. The inertia of government is just too big for one man to change everything, and he isn't. Attacking him certainly doesn't make him sweeter, so why don't we just see what happens? Or people will say, the boss, and then you know what follows that. The boss isn't fair, the boss didn't give me a raise, the boss, whatever it is. And I say something like, well, I'm glad I don't have that job, because when you're the boss, no matter what you do, somebody doesn't like it. You promote somebody to a position. All of the people who weren't promoted usually don't like it. There are some people who do like to stay in the same position, but these are tough jobs to have. So I can join in a conversation when somebody is being spoken of in a negative way, but I don't have to join in the negative part. And you don't either. If you quit thinking that you'll find a workplace, if you think you're going to find a workplace that has none of this pettiness, none of this squabbling, you're probably dreaming, because people are like this. People do this everywhere. It's you that has to learn to deal with it. You can be in a place like that, but you do not have to be like everybody else. And you can still participate enough in the conversation and be a part of the team without being bitter or petty. But if you feel victimized by their conversations, you'll lose. They'll sense it. Or if you try to get everybody to like you, you'll lose. So we're back to my initial recommendation. Be yourself without being bitter and petty, because I don't know any child. Have you ever met a newborn that you meet for the first time who's, a month old, and you look at this newborn and go, bitter and petty? These are qualities we learn. It is not part of who you really are. So be yourself. New subject. I know a woman who we'll call Carrie, who lives with a narcissist, and they're trying to raise a child. Her husband is a narcissist. She asks for a lot of advice because narcissists are very persuasive in their arguments. They have to be, because narcissists pretty much always get their way. They're never wrong. They always get their way, so they have to be at least somewhat persuasive to get everybody to agree and give them whatever they want. Sometimes I give her suggestions. Sometimes I just love her. Sometimes I teach her broader principles. But he married perfectly for a narcissist. He married somebody, this woman I'm talking about, Carrie, who is easily confused, who's not confident, who gets lost in a conversation, at which point he's won, who finds it difficult to focus. So he wins all the arguments. And he's demeaning, demanding, intimidating, and never, ever wrong. That's the single characteristic that a narcissist has. If you want to distinguish whether somebody is, just ask somebody who knows them. Have you ever heard this person say, I was wrong? Come to think of it, no, never. Well, the odds are very high that they are a narcissist. When I teach her how to respond to him, she does, but she follows the advice that she's given like 1 out of 3 times, or 1 out of 4, or 1 out of 10, or none. And it's very haphazard how she responds to him. I wrote back to her, are you getting any of what I'm telling you? Often I write to you to extensively explain something, and then in the next email, you give no indication at all that you heard a thing I said. Sometimes I feel like you're not in the conversation at all. You just want me to solve individual situations. But general principles and patterns don't stick to you, because we keep discussing the same problems. And you certainly don't report back consistently with what you did with what I say. In other words, that you went and did it. If you're going to ask somebody for advice and say that you trust them, it's worth at least trying several times in a row. You try it once, you learn nothing, because you come up against the established patterns of the people that you're dealing with. She wrote back, she said, so you're talking about my being accountable. Yeah, this is pretty huge in our marriage. I hold my husband accountable for almost nothing until I realize that we're falling apart. And then by the time we're falling apart and everything's going to hell and he's been right enough times in a row, by the time I approach him, it's with fear and anger and usually no plan. Same pattern for myself. It's utter lunacy the way I'm running my relationship with my husband. Sigh. Yes. Thank you. Exactly like that. Big problems come from ignoring little ones, just like the match and the grass fire. Big successes result from consistently making small steps. Until you hold your husband accountable 100% of the time for a particular thing, nothing will change. Not a single thing, because his pattern of behavior is very well established. In fact, with a narcissist, possibly will never change. And I know how hard that would be. Now, what do I mean by accountable? Accountable doesn't mean changing somebody. You simply have to tell him every time that he is demeaning, demanding, intimidating, and inflexible. You just tell him that that's what he's doing. You can't control it, but you can point it out. But you are so far from pointing it out even 20% of the time that he regards each time you hold him accountable as, well, like a fluke or rude or inconvenient or as an aggressive accident or even assault. So he doesn't pay attention to it at all. It's just freakish when you do finally hold him accountable. You can't hold yourself as accountable because you don't yet trust the true principles or love. You trust your past experience because it's familiar, even though it's never worked. You actually trust fear. That if you're afraid long enough, if you cry long enough with your husband, you figure that he will become sympathetic and listen to you. And yet that has never happened, but you continue to trust it. You hope that if you're afraid long enough, somehow it might just magically stop. The world will change. You trust fear and your narcissistic husband. You listen much more closely to his twisted, kind of insane logic, and it does become insane so that he can always get what he wants, and to your entitled children more than you listen to people who understand how to be happy. And then you tell me how nothing I tell you works. We've had these conversations many times. Now, for those of you who are listening, this may sound like a fairly blunt conversation. Yeah, it kind of is. This is about as bluntly as I talk to people. But see, we've had this same conversation, 85 times, roughly. And nothing has changed. So when somebody veers off the road and goes down the cliff and wrecks their car and they come up and they spend some time in intensive care and they do that 85 times in a row, it might be time to speak more directly to them, like, don't drive. She says, I remember trusting you in the beginning. What happened? You got sucked back into the world of lies because it was huge. You had brief interactions with me that were trusting and illuminating, and then you moved right back into the cave where everybody defined darkness and dampness and blackness as normal. And you chose to let it happen, although in fairness, you didn't realize that you were doing it. You continue, trusting you when nobody else was there was easy. True, you didn't have everybody else in the cave screaming at you that darkness is normal. I took you out into the light and showed you the valleys and the rivers and the sunshine and the hills, and you loved every second of it. But it was just me. So it could look to some people like 1,000 votes to 1, except that you saw the hills and the lights and the rivers and the valleys and the trees. You were there. 1,000 blind votes count as nothing. You say, trusting you when everybody else around me says that what I'm doing is harmful is harder. I try defending the principles or defending you. I try to show the fruit of my work, but I waste energy as I do so. I try to explain, but always come up short. I try to show proof, but nobody cares about all the stories of people that have been helped by being unconditionally loved. Of course not, because everybody that you're talking to lives in a cave and really believes the cave is the world. They've never seen these things that you're talking about. You talk about unconditional love and you're talking gibberish to them. So of course they don't understand you. You say, nobody out here, actually it's nobody in here in the cave, gets me. And when I work as hard as I can to feel love, to remember the light in the midst of this, the strength just doesn't feel like enough against the boulder of stubbornness that is my husband and his mother and his father and everybody else that I know. I'm going to repeat the cave metaphor. It's heartbreaking. You were raised in a cave your whole life long. Then you married somebody who lives in a cave, somebody who's actually fanatically attached to the idea that the cave is the whole world. And he's particularly good at it because he's managed to manipulate some of the paths and characteristics of the cave to get what he wants. You don't know how to get out. I took you by the hand and showed you the difference between the cave and not being in the cave. But then all of the people in the cave, when you returned home, said, get back in here. Everybody. Your parents, your parents-in-law, your husband, your friend, get back in here. And you did. This is tough stuff. It takes real guts to change the pattern of a lifetime. But you might be doing better. I mean, you might do better if you would remember this. That when they say get back in here, they're lost, you're not. Your family is run by a narcissist. You were raised by people who were not emotionally stable. Your family is not run by principles, true principles. Your family isn't run by divine principles, not by love, just the momentary whims of a selfish, sick child and the entitled children that you've raised together, actually, that the narcissist has raised for you. So, to everybody who's listening to this is the end of my responding to her particular email. I have lots of conversations like this. We really are raised in caves, most of us. If all you've ever known is a cave, then the world is a cave. This has been going on for so long that Plato, 100 million years ago, a philosopher, actually wrote a treatise on the subject of this cave metaphor. We think it's the world, and why wouldn't we? Nobody ever leaves the cave. If any of you have ever been in the deep bowels of a twisted cave, you don't ever accidentally find the opening. No kidding. All of the little twists and turns and curves and places you can go all look alike, and you just go in circles round and round and round. Nobody leaves. If they do, they don't come back. So one day, they're just suddenly gone, and those of us who are still in the cave don't learn anything. We have to find somebody who's been in both places, who's lived in the cave, who's been outside the cave, and who's had the courage to return and teach us. And then we have to have the faith and the courage to follow them into the light and stay there, as opposed to living in the cave where we just kind of bounce from one rock to another and fall down one pit after another. We just spend our entire lives blind and reacting. We become, in effect, billiard balls. We react. It has to change in order for us to be happy. I've never seen a happy billiard ball. I've never seen one express misery either, but they have no choices. So you don't see joyous things that just react. We are in the unique position as human beings to learn to make choices, actually happy choices. It's possible. I know a woman, Bonnie, who has been underemployed, underappreciated, undervalued, and pretty much under a rock her whole life. She learned real love and began to wake up. She tried things. She talked to people. She realized that she wasn't doing half of what she could because she'd been told all of her life by the people in the cave, you have to just sit right here in the darkness because if you move, you'll bang your shins against the rocks. And so she did nothing. So somebody took her by the hand and showed her another way to live, and she started to move. She wrote me and said, I have 2 job interviews this week. I have less fear and more willingness to do something that is new and hard. It's paying off. It's like a miracle. Well, yes and no. A miracle implies a sudden thing. It implies it. It's not always true, but it implies a sudden thing done to you or for you. Look at all the steps you've taken to get to this point. Now, all those steps together are a miracle, and all the assistance you've gotten all the way along, that counts as a miracle. People just want to go out and find a better job. That's like saying, I want to go out and just be a neurosurgeon, or I just want to be a great husband when I'm nowhere near. You don't just fall into these conditions. You prepare for them. And often we don't recognize the steps that we take toward a particular thing because they don't appear to be connected. They're often disjointed. Often the very next step that I need to take is something that is 80 degrees off the course that I'm on. And yet in some way, it contributes to the next thing that I do straight ahead. In no particular order do I list them. But you did a bunch of things to make this miracle happen. You learned to trust some wise people. You learned to be way less controlling than you used to be. That was big for you. That let you learn to trust even more. You began to listen to your intuition or revelation to guide you in making the next decision. Feeling guided by an inner voice or by God, whatever you choose to call it, rather than making a decision you wanted and strangling it into existence, you had a much greater confidence that you were in the flow of the universe instead of wrestling against it. You began to love people. You offered who you are to them. You saw that who you are is actually highly desirable, that you have something to offer. And now you're going to simply go out there and offer who you are, everything you've done up to this point to the world. And I know, and you know, that somebody will see your value. Financially, as a leader, your value and your confidence, your emotional value, and more, and will pay you for it. Like you said, you just got 2 job interviews. Apparently in your application, you indicated your value in some way that you've never been able to indicate before. And now you're going to carry who you are into your interviews. Look at how many of those decisions that you've made were not for the purpose of finding a job. That's what I mean by many of the decisions we make don't appear to be related to our end goal. And yet, precisely because you made them, you're now prepared to look for a better job. Nice work. You continue. A wise friend reminded me that looking for a job is much like dating. I'm just learning more about them to see if it's a good match. During the interview, I'm developing a new relationship with the supervisor in the company. I can't lose because I'll still have your love and other people's love who have loved me all along this journey. And whether I get the job or not, that's not going to change. I'll let you know how it goes. I'm learning something. She concludes, yeah, no kidding. You really are. We love to talk about dramatic events in our lives. We love drama. There was a fire, my house burned down. I won the lottery. And those things are certainly worth mentioning. We like to show how this particular big thing that we did led to a good result. But most of the time, it's actually a beautifully subtle and eternally crafted tapestry of decisions, perspectives, events, people, and more that led to the life we have now. You are doing a great job of weaving, and it happens one step at a time. Not just for her, but for all of us. With every choice we make, with every minute of the day we spend, we weave something into the tapestry, or we don't. Or we just let the people around us create a tapestry for us, or burn it to the ground, or shove it deep into a cave. We make these decisions one at a time, and it creates a life. One thing I can tell you for sure, with each decision we make, with each interaction, with each person, with each circumstance, if we ask, how can I bring more love into this situation? We'll be the better for it. We'll see you in a week.